Hi, my name is Brittany Binskus, and this is um, my project PowerPoint over special education assessment process and basically some things to remember. So first thing to remember is like least restrictive environment. So least restrictive environment is where kids with disabilities are taught in the same classroom with students who um, don't have disabilities. So this is them staying in the regular education classroom together, unless progress can't be made because of the disability or the severity of the disability of the student. So some things to think about for that, like OT, PT, speech, those things that there are some things that can be done in the classroom or for instance even PE, things like that, but sometimes that progress can't be made and so it needs to they need to be pulled out. Also some things to think about is other kids might not work as well either with distractions of the regular education classroom or they might not want to be seen with this other person. Otherwise, if they're just pulled out of class, it might seem like they're being taken to like go talk to somebody or this is just normal to what they do, whatever the case is. So that can kind of be something to think about with students pulling them out of classrooms. Other things to think about. So this does have to do though with like aids in the classroom, that gains can't be made with aids in the classroom. Um, so some things to think about also are so like if a student is way behind, their disability is a learning disability and they are behind their peers and they can't just work one-on-one with the teacher or the aide during certain times, they might need to be pulled and put with a special education teacher so that they can really focus and maybe be with a small group that also has the same needs or um, almost basically the same goals as they do, so they can work a little bit more on certain areas that the child is struggling with. Something else that needs to be thought about is, can a para be put into the classroom for the support that the child needs? Maybe they're not as behind, so a para, making sure that they're staying focused or help with any questions. And paras can also help anybody else in the classroom as well, so that's kind of um, a nice thought, something to think about when considering least restrictive environment and needing to keep the student in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so next is the cycle special education assessment. So this is so how and why is it a cycle? So basically for special education, you start with the like interventions and referrals or something to think about. Um, so this has to do with uh, the teacher going to maybe a team that the school has set up and saying, hey, I've got a student that they're having issues and they need, is there something I can do in my classroom? So this is the intervention part of it. And that's when the team comes together. There's also screenings that happen. So for instance, I am the head coordinator for birth to 5 screenings for 5 school districts for the co-op that I work at. So we have screenings that help kind of us assess and get students who maybe have um, disabilities now, so we can try to get them caught up and out of special ed before they get much older, because it's easier to try to correct things or help them, and identification early is key. So that's kind of nice. But after, let's say they're older and they've tried the intervention, they've tried that, and they go to referral. So the next thing is that we have to determine eligibility, and uh, when you do the referral, you have to make sure that you notify the parents. So determination of eligibility has to do with planning what kind of assessment tools we're going to use to decide what this child needs, if anything. We also need to get parent permission at this point and get them involved in what we're doing and what we're seeing. And we need to get their input on what they do, what they're seeing at home, and just kind of start the communication process. After that's decided, if the child qualifies, parents agree to it. It's basically the IEP, the implementation of the IEP. So we have to go over results. We have to talk about what we're going to do to help that child, and just kind of get that all together ready to go. The last part of it, this is kind of where the cycle part comes in. It's the actual implementation of the IEP. So this is like this is now taking, the kid has it, these are the goals, we're putting it in the classroom, they're getting pulled for services if they need to, and then we evaluate or reevaluate every 3 years usually. That's just best practice standards currently, with the IEP being with progress monitoring for the IEP, and then they're looking at kind of gains, um, progress monitoring. That's okay. So we have progress monitoring that we do, and then they're looking at, so when they do the IEP, they have to relook at it and make sure that the goals are still what they need to be, or they need to change the goals in any way, making sure that the IEP is still current. And they do that every year. Now, as far as like the eval goes, like I said, every 3 years for best practice, but that's kind of why it's a cycle, because it gets redone to make sure that the child is still making gains, to make sure that the child um, is still in need of an IEP. Many kids come off of IEPs, so they become unnecessary. Also, currently, the state of Kansas requires that at the age of 10, they have to have a very specific label about why they're on an IEP. So up until 10, they could be um, labeled like developmentally delayed. And then once they hit 10, is it a specific learning disability? Is it a speech language um, or other health impairments? They need an actual label at that point. So it's just good practice that it gets redone every 3 years to make sure that everything is, child still needs it, still qualifies for an IEP, and that we are doing what we can to help them. The next part of this, so encouraging family participation, which can be difficult. Sometimes it depends upon the family, like all families. But some ways to help that. So, and this can honestly be used with any family anybody deals with, whether you're going to go into special ed education or not. So like friendly environments. So think about your school. Does everybody know where to enter? Do you guys have clearly marked exit signs that are lit? Do you guys have, a lot of schools now have put in doorbells with cameras? Do they know to push the doorbell that'll activate the camera so that they can be, let into the schools, or that someone can know that someone is in the school? Also, you need to be very warm and welcoming towards family, to the family, especially since at any given time they can actually be in the classroom. You can't tell them, no, this is their child. So that's just some things to think about. Just having that, family friendly environment, that you greet them, you talk to them, keep them updated. You also welcome to the school like they need to be, and that your staff, so like the secretaries are very welcoming, very helpful. A lot of things to think about. Next thing is positive communication. It's not just communication, it's positive communication. A lot of times that can be very difficult, especially when we work with other students, but we need to be sending positive communication home. So a teacher that I worked with, she would use highlighters to grade papers, but they would be, nice bright colors, and she would put stars all over it, big happy faces, and she would still put a note that said, like, did with help or did by self, just big and bold, just happy face, that they actually got through this assignment. The point is that they got through it. But even just little things, positive things for the child that focus on the child. They did great today. They um, made progress towards their goal. Just anything that can be positive. This can be done for even all kids. Another thing is to provide information. A lot of parents will not be familiar with special education or the assessments or the laws or anything. So it's a good idea to provide a frequently asked question page with answers on it. You need to put things in layman's terms, or, just slow down, back off the big words and trying to, confuse parents. Also, make sure things are, so besides providing it information that they understand, use things that give them books that'll help them understand. Give support, so tell them where else they can reach out and learn about things. Maybe even have other parents that are willing to help new parents through this process. And of course, conferences. Aside from the annual IEP, make sure that if a parent wants a conference, you're available for it, you're good to go. Make sure that they know that they can reach you, have a conference anytime. It's just a good thing. So, last thing is derived scores, which this goes into. So, percentile ranks, which that's a raw score that's put onto a normal distribution. And as we can see it down here, so like it's if they have this percentile score, so let's say a 50, then or their percentile rank is 50, then they scored the same as 50% of everybody or less. But they still also have 50% of people that they scored worse, that they scored lower than. So it has to do with this normal distribution and where they kind of fall based upon their raw score. The next one is standard scores. Standard scores it's the raw score converted into another score and used on this normal curve again. And so anyway, then from this normal curve, it's right here. Then it goes out standard deviations, and they're usually about 15, with the standard score being 100. And then from there, based upon that, that's how far out they are from the norm per se of this group that was taken. I don't know how to say it, so I'm going to guess. Stenines, that is down here. It's basically this bell curve distributed into 9 equal parts, and it goes, they're about a 0.5 standard deviation is what it's called, away from each other, that chunk that they are. And so anyway, it's another way to kind of interpret scores and kind of where the kids fall. The higher the better, with 5 being an average, give or take. So all these kind of have to do with where does a child fall within their norm group, or even an adult, but where does this person fall within their norm group? So it's just a different way to interpret all the same score based upon preference. So that was my take on this project and special education assessment process, and just some things to remember. Thanks for listening.